Good afternoon, everybody. Warm welcome to this webinar as part of the Foresight webinar series. As you all know, it's a project Foresight organized as an Erasmus Plus project. And so there's different campus, different partners contributing. This is a presentation organized by ESCP Business School. And as part of the idea to create a platform to exchange about how to teach digital transformation, I'm more than happy today to welcome Tristan Thordsen to talk to us about digital maturity. Everybody's talking about digital transformation, and as part of this, in particular in regards to the rise of ChatGPT and so on, people are talking about competencies, digital competencies, so taking more and more an individual point of view. But isn't there something more if we think about digital transformation on the organizational side? So maybe sometimes we forget, we neglect the organizational perspective. And B, we cannot consider all companies being on the same maturity level. Actually, they even don't need to be. So I don't know, your hairdresser around the corner has other digital maturity than maybe a car manufacturer or the bakery or even a university. So, and I'm more than happy that we can point on this topic today to learn a little bit what is digital maturity. And Tristan will talk to us about the matter how he can maybe conceptualize a digital maturity model, and on the other hand, how it can be applied in different settings. And yeah, in no further ado, I just want to hand over to you, Tristan. And I think you maybe will briefly introduce yourself, and then you will jump into the content, and then I wish us a very insightful presentation. Tristan, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction, Professor Bick. I am very glad to be here today virtually. We are going to have a hands-on presentation. I'm going to explain to you what that means in a second. And as we said, we are going to have a look at digital maturity. What does it mean? How can we define it? How can we apply a digital maturity model? And what can we learn from it? All right. Yes, everyone can see the presentation now, digital maturity concept and application. In the background, you see the skyline of Berlin, just on a side note. You can, of course, come and visit us. We are very happy to welcome you on campus. First of all, let us define some central terms in order for us to speak the same language so that we know what we are actually talking about. Every one of you, I'm sure, has already heard these three terms: digitization, digitalization, digital transformation. We have just used those terms, but it is not always clear what is meant by these terms. So let us very quickly define what each of these words, phenomena mean. Let us start with digitization. Digitization is actually the process of converting something that is analog, let us say an image, a photograph, in a digital file. So this is just the conversion of something analog into something digital. Digitalization is a closely related term. However, digitalization is rather the making a process digital. So instead of having an analog process of working with the photograph, we are translating that process into a digital process, into different digital depth. And last but not least, we are talking about digital transformation. Digital transformation is about how companies implement digital processes into their business models, into their operations, into their daily work. And so we are now on the same page: digitization, digitalization, and digital transformation. This is what we need to know in order to get started. What are the drivers of digitalization and digital transformation? I have a few of these questions prepared, and I will just take a few seconds in order for you to think about the question and maybe even write down some answers of what comes to your mind. So don't be surprised if I'm having a 10-second break after the questions. This is just for you to be able to think about it and get into the topic. Eventually, I will, of course, answer that question, but it would be very nice if you would try to just, reflect on it a bit and see what comes to mind. So, what are the drivers of digitalization and digital transformation? The first driver that we can identify is, of course, technological change. Technological change induces an expectation from the customers. So we always want to have services or products that are up to date, that are cutting edge. And this is why technological change also changes the customer experience and expectations. Other drivers of digitalization and digital transformation are cost efficiency. Having digital processes is usually much more cost efficient and also more effective. Then through digital technologies such as AI or IoT, there are new business opportunities that are forming. And last but not least, of course, if everyone changes their portfolio, if products and services are becoming better and better, then of course there is also a lot of competitive pressure. Why does the business landscape change? Of course, there is another aspect as well when it comes to technological change. There is also the phenomenon of globalization. Every one of us is more interconnected. We can communicate across the globe, and we can also buy services and products from all over the world. So this is another intensifying phenomenon that contributes to the digital transformation and also has an impact on it, of course. So coming back to the question, why does the business landscape change? Competition is getting much harder, and it is about not becoming obsolete. Companies in most industries need to change, they need to adapt to these changing customer expectations. They will need to implement digital processes in order to stay cost effective, and they need to work on these new market opportunities that are opening. So there is actually a very big danger of not adapting to digital transformation. I'm sure you all know the examples of, for example, Kodak, a very, very successful company that produced films for cameras, analog films. And today, 30 years after they were very, very successful market leaders, they do not exist anymore. And there are some other examples where we can see that continuous change is something that is very important for a lot of industries, but it is something very incremental. And if a company does not adapt to these changes, then it might not prevail. So what does exactly change in the business landscape? What does it mean what can I think of that changes in a company? So as we already said, processes become much more efficient. So the way companies operate, the way it is communicated in organizations, but also, of course, very importantly, the skills and the capabilities and competencies of individuals also changes. So organizational change always entailed change of the employee, of the business model, of the way of communicating with partners, establishing networks. Also, the concept of platforms becomes much more important, meaning that customers are directly in contact with the organization, but also with other organizations that provide similar or the same products or services. Digital transformation, even though it is largely an organizational phenomenon, also has a great impact on society. And why does society change? What could you imagine being the causes for that? Why does society change due to digital transformation? As we have said, new technologies change the way that we interact, but of course, also the type of social platforms that we are using, for example, also the needs that we have, the expectations that we have, the way we spend our leisure activities, but also our daily lives. So for example, streaming is a rather new phenomenon, social media platforms, as we have already said, but also the way that we interact with AI. So ChatGPT, for example, is a very big change of how we perceive new technologies and how we interact with new technologies. Of course, another very big mega trend is the age of the society. So people are becoming much older. So also the way that technology is used and also how people adapt to technology becomes different. So let us go a bit more into detail. What exactly changes in society? We have already said that our social activities change, the way that we spend our leisure time, the way that we spend our working time changes. And it is very importantly that also the communication between individuals changes due to digital transformation. There's basically no area in our daily lives that is not affected by digital transformation. We use our cell phones every 5 minutes. We consume digital media the entire day, and technology guides our lives. So not only in society, but also in the business environment, digital transformation has a very, very big impact. The need for organizations to transform. The question is, why do organizations actually need to transform? We already tackled this question a bit: efficiency, competition, global pressure, but let us go a bit further into detail. So why is it relevant for companies to adapt to these changes? and what will happen if they will not do it. So as we had the examples already, it is actually a very realistic scenario that if companies do not adapt to these changes, both society changes, so customers, customer expectations, customer experience, and also the organization themselves, they will not be able to prevail. They will not be competitive in the long term. So how can the level of a company's digital transformation be assessed? And how can organizations know how to become more digital? So after this small prelude, we are now arriving to the central terms, the central points of our presentation today. The concept of digital maturity. Let us first ask ourselves, what is maturity? Maturity is basically the way that a person reacts, or an individual reacts on external circumstances. And this principle can also be displayed on organizations. So digital maturity actually means what a company has already achieved in regards to its digital transformation. So it is basically the status of a customer's, of a company's, of an organization's digital status quo. Let us take a very basic maturity model, actually the first maturity model that has been established. I think every one of you knows this model. It is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And as the title already says, it is a hierarchy. So there are different levels of needs that, for example, in this case, a human has. So we start with very basic physiological needs, and then the higher we get, once the prerequisites for each level are attained, we can move one level up. And this is the very basic principle of a maturity model, meaning that once a level has been completed, either an individual or an organization can move up to the next level to ultimately reach a level of maturity. And this is also the underlying principle of digital maturity models, meaning that instead of physiological needs, we have the level of digital maturity, so the status of an organization's digital transformation. There are different levels defined. There is a basic level, and after that basic level, after having completed this level, the organization is able to move up until it reaches the final level of digital maturity. Let us take a look at a digital maturity model. But first of all, the architecture of a digital maturity model needs to be shortly defined. So very similar to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, there are different levels of maturity, different levels of evolutionary stages that the organization will need to achieve in order to, in the end, be digitally mature. And very importantly, there are also dimensions. So the architecture of digital maturity models can be broken down into maturity levels and maturity dimensions. The maturity dimensions actually are the way of assessing the digital status quo. So there are different dimensions that are relevant for each of the maturity levels, and having completed a certain level, a prerequisite of maturity in those dimensions, the organization will be able to move on to the next digital maturity level. I know this sounds quite complicated, but let us simply take a look at the dimensions of digital maturity first, and then we will also check the levels of digital maturity. All right, we are going to start with a quite basic digital maturity model. It is a very transparent one. As you can imagine, the tool of digital maturity models is very popular in today's consultancy, business consultancies. So this is those are the dimensions of a digital maturity model that has been developed by Forrester, which is a business consultancy. We can see 4 dimensions based on which this digital maturity model actually assesses the level of digital maturity of an organization. We have the dimension of culture with a short description. So culture in this case means a company's approach to digitally driven innovation and how it empowers employees with digital technology. This leads us to the next dimension, which is technology, defined as a company's use and adoption of emerging technologies. All right, then please have a look at the next 2 building blocks, organization and insights. Please read through them carefully, and then we will be able to move on in our presentation. We have now seen 4 dimensions that are chosen by this business consultancy in order to assess the level of digital transformation of an organization. Could you think of additional dimensions that are not culture, technology, organization, or insights as they have just been presented? What could be other dimensions in addition to those that we have just seen? Other dimensions there can be multiple other dimensions. And this is actually what leads us to our next slide. So there is not only one digital maturity model with 4 dimensions, but there are plenty of different digital maturity models established by both business consultancies and also by scientists. So different additional dimensions here, as they are displayed by McKinsey, could be strategy and innovation, customer decision journey, organization, we had that already, data and analytics, technology. This is also a dimension that we have found at the Forrester digital maturity model already, and process automation. So as you can see, the McKinsey model is quite similar to the Forrester model here, but it provides us with 2 additional dimensions in order to assess the digital maturity of a company. Also, the definition of these dimensions is different. In order to show you that there are additional dimensions and perspectives on how to assess digital maturity, we are now taking a look at one of the publications of our chair. We have, for example, defined 15 different digital maturity model, different maturity dimensions in order to assess the level of a company's digital maturity. As an example, we have culture and expertise, collaboration, operational processes, business model, and customer experience. As you can see, these are only 5 out of the 15 dimensions that we have researched, that we have found, and that we are integrating in our very own digital maturity model. So there is no limited number of dimensions that can be used for a certain digital maturity model. It is rather the perspective of the researcher or the business consultant on that topic that defines the number of dimensions used in order to assess the organization's digital maturity. We have another example here of Capgemini, another business consultancy. And here you can see the different graduations of each dimension. So this is a point where we can see different levels emerging. So for example, the dimension of customer experience has 3 different levels that can be attained, starting with customer touchpoints to top-line growth to customer understanding. This is the same with operational processes and business models that are used by the organization, leading us to the digital maturity levels. I'm sure you were already very curious on how these would look like. Forrester has provided us with 4 digital maturity levels. They have given these levels very specific names. For example, the skeptics are organizations with a low level of digital maturity. Then there are the adopters with a bit of a higher level, collaborators, and finally the differentiators who have a high level of maturity. Something that is also very important is to provide a short description of each of the levels. As you can see, the skeptics are just beginning their digital journey. They have a prompt and willing attitude. This stands in contrast with the differentiators who are leveraging data to drive customer obsession and blend the digital and physical worlds. So as you can see, getting an idea of what a different level entails, we can already think where, for example, a specific organization belongs. There is also another way of defining maturity levels. So for example, Capgemini has provided us with a framework, with a matrix. So the beginners, they are, as the skeptics for the Forrester model, they are at the very beginning of their digital journey. Then we have the fashionistas who have a bit of a different profile, but are a bit higher up in their digital maturity. We have the conservatives, which are concentrating on management to drive forward digital transformation. And the most mature companies in that case would be the Digirati. They have a strong overarching digital vision, good governance, many digital initiatives generating business value in measurable ways, and a very strong digital culture. As an example from our research, we have defined 6 different maturity levels. Very similar to Forrester, we have also provided you with a short description of these levels. An organization would start at the initiation with basic IT support to their daily business. Then they would move up to enabling, so they would use IT to let the IT grow through the entire organization, and they would start training the employees using different softwares and the IT infrastructure. And then there is the regulation, digital business model, customer centricity, and last but not least, the highest level of digital maturity is optimization. It is very important to point out that the highest level of digital maturity actually consists in continuously reflecting on all of the defined dimensions and challenging them. So the technological change is so quick and so dynamic that no organization can actually always remain digitally mature if they are not continuously reflecting and challenging on the dimensions of digital transformation. All right, so let us now come to a very, very important and basically the most central aspect of digital maturity models. I'm sure you are already asking yourselves, how is it even possible to measure concepts such as organization or technology? How can the dimensions of digital maturity even be measured? And in this case, we are trying to operationalize certain concepts. What does that mean? It means that we try to have or to translate a rather abstract concept such as organization or technology into smaller parts, smaller bits, smaller statements that actually characterize this concept, this more abstract idea. But what do I actually mean? Let us take a look. So let us think of 5 statements, 5 sentences to measure the following concept. We have the dimension of culture, we have the dimension of technology, organization, and insights. Those need to be measured. So we need to define a number of statements that characterize these dimensions in the best possible way. So for example, a company's culture is defined here as a company's approach to digitally driven innovation. This is the first part. Then how it empowers employees with digital technology. So as you can see, this complex definition is made up of 2 different parts. So a statement that we could derive here would be, for example, a company drives digital innovation actively forward. This would mean that we translate the definition of culture into a concrete statement. The second part of this dimension can also be translated. For example, a company empowers employees through the use of new digital technologies. Meaning, for example, they provide their employees with tools in order to effectively communicate. So in this case, we translate this dimension into 3 different statements. One targeting the digitally driven innovation, the other one targeting the empowerment, and a last one, for example, targeting the concept of communication in that company. I know this is quite an abstract idea, but of course, we have a very hands-on example here that we are going to look at now. This is the set of statements that Forrester has defined in order to measure the dimension of culture. So instead of our 3 statements that we have derived, Forrester has 7 statements that can be assessed on a scale of 0 to 3. So 0 means that the company manager would completely disagree. 3 would mean that he or she completely agrees. So the first statement in this context would be, we believe that our competitive strategy depends on digital. Our board and our C-level executives back our digital strategy. As you can see, these statements stand for the dimension of culture that Forrester has defined as integral for assessing a company's digital maturity. So through these 7 statements and the way that they are answered by managers or researchers, we can actually measure the concept of culture that is quite abstract, but through these statements, we have a tool in order for us to make this a bit less abstract, in order to measure a practical phenomenon and translate it into numbers, and making it possible for us to measure culture in a digital maturity model. Organization was the next dimension. Here, organization is also translated into 7 statements. Please take a closer look at what organization means and what the different statements can be in this case. The third dimension that Forrester has given us is the dimension of technology. And again, we have 7 statements characterizing this dimension. Our last dimension is called insights. Again, 7 statements have been derived in order to measure this dimension. And this leads us to the final questionnaire. So in order for you to try out how this works, how this digital maturity model works, it would be very nice if you just chose one organization out of your mind and try to fill out the questionnaire on your own. So basically try to answer those questions the best way possible. Of course, some of them you will not be able to answer in full, but you will already have an idea of what could be the correct answer here. So here again, the entire questionnaire, pick a company that you know and try to fill out each of the statements based on the numbers provided on the top. So how much do you agree with each of the following statements for the company that you have chosen? 0 means completely disagree, and 3 means completely agree. You can just enter the numbers or write down the numbers, and then you will need to add them up. In the end, you will have a sum, and this sum will actually tell you how digitally mature this organization of yours is. If you need some additional time, of course, you can pause the video now. You can carefully read through all of the statements, complete the survey, and then just continue the video. Of course, I'm also going to show you the results. All of you should now have a sum that comes by adding up the different results of the questionnaire. And now I have also showed you the score range. So if you have a sum that is between 0 and 33, then the organization that you have assessed is a skeptic. If you have a sum that is between 34 and 52, it will be an adopter, between 53 and 71, a collaborator, and from 72 to 84, a differentiator. As you have seen, this maturity model is quite practical, it is quite straightforward, but of course it also has its flaws. So the person answering that survey, of course, needs to be very, very well informed. And of course, there is also some kind of bias if a manager from the organization completes this survey on his or her own. However, I have shown you this model because it is so easy to use and because it is actually the only model provided by a business consultancy that is transparent. Meaning that, of course, business consultancies do not want to show their models to the public as they are making money off providing that service. So this Forrester digital maturity model is quite a very useful and hands-on tool that you can also use on your own or for companies that you want to assess. Here are the results of the model. As you can see, this is the status quo from 2016. This is, of course, already quite old, but as I have said, this model is very simple, it is easy to use, and it is very transparent. There are no new numbers for this model or this publication. However, through Corona and the different developments, it can be said that the entire or the overall level of digital maturity has considerably increased. I have done some research, and in total, all of the different categories have shown to have grown around 5 to 10%. So for example, if we look at the different industries here, then 10% would be skeptics, 41% adopters, collaborators, 37%, and differentiators, 11%. This can, of course, be different for a number of industries. So business services have less skeptics and more differentiators. Financial services are still quite skeptic. Manufacturers are have less skeptics and more collaborators. So as you can see, not all industries are developing in the same pace. Digital transformation influences or affects industries in a different way. But it can be said that digital transformation definitely affects all industries eventually. Here is another short presentation of the results of that survey. In total, the average marketing and technology software budget is 8.9 million for the skeptics, and for the differentiators, it would be 41.5 million. So as you can see, of course, depending on the level of maturity, the average spending in marketing and technology would be much higher. This leads us to the very final question of this presentation. Does every organization need to reach digital maturity? Is it necessary for every organization to be digitally mature, to reach the highest level of a digital maturity level? Is this suitable for every company? And Professor Big has already said it in the very beginning, not every organization needs to be digitally mature. So for example, the restaurant around the corner does not need to be as digitally mature as Google or, for example, Meta. Why is this the case? Because the expectancy of the consumers is different. Also, the product is a different one, providing food in comparison to different digital services is, of course, a very different business model. So it is very important to align the digital strategy, the goals of a company's digital transformation with the customers, with the industry, with the business model of a company. So the answer to this question would actually be no, not every organization needs to reach digital maturity. It needs to have a holistic perspective and assess what is a suitable level of digital maturity. Thank you very much for your attention. Are there any questions that need to be answered from your side, Professor Big?
Yeah, Tristan, thank you very much for doing this presentation. Maybe we can exactly now. Sorry. Maybe you can stop sharing your screen so you maybe can come to a more talkative.
Yes,
mode.
definitely.
And in this regard, I want to start more with a detailed question, and then maybe we'll come up with some more general questions. So
yes, sure.
during your presentation, you focused on the cultural perspective. So far as I understood it, but maybe I'm mistaken, it's also about national culture, but maybe there's also some group culture. So a little bit saying that if somebody fills in this survey, it's a little biased, or maybe not because he or she is a German, but maybe because she's an accountant or the IT guy or whatsoever. So there's this onion model on culture, everybody knows. And so maybe it's a group culture, maybe here more important than maybe national culture. What do you think?
Yes, definitely. Thank you for pointing this out. In this context, culture actually means organizational culture. And this is why defining the dimensions to assess digital maturity are especially important. So group culture or organizational culture are in this context the most important aspects. Of course, national culture also has an influence, but the way people interact in an organization, the goals of an organization, also the character of organization, they are much more important in this dimension, this concept.
Okay, thank you very much. And you ended your presentation saying, okay, the certain different level of maturity, of course, can vary, should vary, maybe even, or it's clear that it varies. But is there maybe a little bit some clusters where I can orientate on? So if I'm, I don't know, a restaurant, or if I am a smaller service company in accounting, or if I'm even a large consultancy, is there like a little bit like this, there is this SCOR organization for supply chain organizations research, which is defining best practice processes. Is there something out for maturity as well? So I understand that maybe the hairdresser, to remain in my example, is totally different to the consultancy or the car manufacturer, or maybe we have clusters or groups which we can compare to.
Of course, benchmarking is a very important aspect, meaning that an organization should always look out at what its competitors are doing. So benchmarking is very important, but of course, it is not so transparent. So there are no really defined clusters. I have shown you the results from the digital maturity assessment from Forrester. This could be, for example, a guideline giving us an idea of how important it would be to move on the digital maturity level. But of course, the central point of an organization are its customers. So seeking to understand what the customer expects and how a product or a service should look like in the eyes of a customer, then also having a look on the processes of the internal processes and also the use of technology can give us a good idea or a good direction of how digitally mature a company should need to be.
Yeah, understand. So maybe even though digital transformation is not young, but there's maybe not so many comparisons possible because maybe even companies don't show off their results or even want to keep it a secret. Okay, understood. But if you look into the plethora of models, and you even described just so many, and you just, just for the sake of time and complexity, focused on one model, how, let's say, how can I be sure to choose the right model for me, for my business? How can I find help to find the right model?
This is actually one of the central questions of our research. So there are more than 60 different digital maturity models. So we have just seen 3 or 4, but there are more than 60 out there, and every day there are new models that are developed. And here we have to take a very pragmatic approach. So the most pragmatic approach would be actually seeing a digital maturity model as a tool that sparks discussion, that sparks the reflection. So in the end, the actual number or the level of digital maturity is not the important point. It is important that a manager asks him or herself a lot of questions regarding the dimensions that are defined in a digital maturity model. So for example, a manager could just choose one of these models and work through the dimensions that are defined there. And then reflect on the statements that are actually provided, for example, reflect on what is possible for his or her organization, then take another model, for example, and again, question the level of maturity or the level of the processes and how advanced the company is regarding those different dimensions. That would be one approach. Another approach would actually be choosing an established digital maturity model, and that is possible by, for example, using Google Scholar and searching for a model that has a high number of citations, for example.
Yeah, but is the number of citations really saying that it is oftenly used?
It might be often cited, but not often used.
Okay, thank you for this orientation. My last question, a little bit challenging, or to challenge you and the topic of digital maturity, so don't take it personal, but my question is it not a little bit of overdoing So all the surveys, all the questions, all the procedures. Because you said, yes, on the one hand, we need to be honest and clear and fair to look into what we have. But typically good managers already know what they have and even what they want. So they have a clear direction. And maybe sometimes too comprehensive answers might be also not very, very beneficial, to put it that way, even more hindering. So could it be that maybe digital maturity is a nice, good, ideal approach, but on the other hand, maybe not very realistic approach?
That is a challenging question, of course. Of course, you are right. There are some companies, arguably the companies that are very successful, who will not need to have a digital maturity model. They will already be quite informed. They will have experts, and they will discuss the important aspects of digital maturity on a daily basis, define a digital strategy, and know exactly where they want to go. They know their customers, they know their product, they know their business model. They're very well informed. But the vast majority of organizations, they only know that becoming more digitalized is important in order to stay competitive. They know that they need to evolve, that they need to develop, but they do not know how. And this creates a very high insecurity on the side of organizations, and digital maturity models can show the manager, they can be a practical tool, a hands-on instrument in order to start this discussion, in order to start the digital journey, to show organizations what they need to take into consideration, and they will provide a certain kind of guidance for those companies.
Okay. Tristan, thank you so much for all the insights. Thank you very much for your time and your willingness to answer all the nasty questions. And I wish you a nice day, and thank you very much for your support to our Foresight project. Have a nice day.
Thank you.